They sold you a dream. They said, "Great Russia." They said, "High wages." They said, "Secure jobs." Thousands of young people from the poor neighborhoods of New Delhi, Mumbai, and Dhaka followed this dream and flew north to that vast white country. The story they were told was this: they would work in warm factories in Moscow, send dollars back to their families, and be part of Putin's new industrial revolution. But the moment they got off the plane and handed their passports to that official, the dream ended, and the nightmare began. The fearful eyes you see on the screen right now do not belong to a group of tourists. These are the victims of modern-day human trafficking, imported to finance Vladimir Putin's special military operation. While Russia throws its own men into the meat grinder of Ukrainian trenches, it pumps fresh blood from the depths of Asia to fill the void left behind. But this blood doesn't mix. Neo-Nazi gangs hunt immigrants in the streets. Workers whose passports have been confiscated are forced to labor like slaves in factories. And worst of all, those young men you thought were construction workers suddenly find themselves in the muddy trenches of Donetsk, armed with weapons and Russian-language papers thrust into their hands. Today on MrWARLOG, we expose the dirty secret the Kremlin is trying to hide. We'll talk about how Putin's so-called friendship is actually exploitation, the desperate cries of Indian families, and how Russia has turned into a hell of racism. This is Moscow, and here, human life is cheaper than the ruble. Welcome! It all started with a handshake. Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi. The two leaders smiled for the cameras and talked about a strategic partnership. But the reality on the ground was not strategy, but tragedy. According to data from the Russian Federal State Statistics Service, Rosstat, and independent sources, Russia has accepted a record number of migrants from India and Bangladesh over the past 9 years. According to a report by Charter 97, thousands of new workers entered Russia in just the first month of 2026. The Kremlin's plan was simple: replace Russian men who died in the war or fled the country with cheap and obedient Asian workers. The Russian economy needs a full 12.2 million people over the next 7 years. For a country whose population is dwindling, whose birth rates are plummeting, and whose most productive men are missing from the front lines, this figure is a demographic bankruptcy. Putin has desperately begun human importation to postpone this bankruptcy. The Express UK newspaper's headline sums up the situation. Desperate Putin turns to huge country, India, to solve labor crisis. The first batch of 40,000 has already arrived. So, what did they find when they got there? Where are those promised modern lodgings? Where are those high salaries? Leaked social media footage shows these people being held in conditions akin to a concentration camp, stacked on top of each other on bunk beds, in places with no hygiene and no heating. Their passports are confiscated. They are told, "You cannot leave until you pay your debt." These people are not workers. These people are the serfs of modern Russia. According to a report by United 24 Media, Putin has reached out not only to India, but even to Afghanistan. They are negotiating with the Taliban for workers. Consider this. Moscow is now begging for workers from Afghanistan, a country it once occupied. They are increasing the recruitment of foreign workers to save the economy, but there are no laws, no unions, and no rights to protect these workers. They are just statistics, a part of the production line. And when they break down, that is, when they get sick or die, they are replaced with new ones, like spare parts. As if slavery in the factory weren't enough, another hell awaits them when they step outside. Russian racism. While the Kremlin tells the world the fairy tale that we are fighting Nazis in Ukraine, real Nazism is growing in the back streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, with the state turning a blind eye. United 24 Media's in-depth investigation has exposed the growing neo-Nazi networks in Russia, which specifically target journalists and foreigners. These gangs organize through Telegram channels. They call themselves cleaning squads. Who are their targets? The vulnerable Indian, Bangladeshi, and Central Asian workers invited to the country by Putin. Look closely at this image. Hindu students attacked in a university dormitory simply because of the color of their skin. What is their crime? Studying in Russia, bringing foreign currency into Russia. In another video, we see the helplessness of a migrant being harassed on the subway. What are the Russians around him doing? Just watching. Or filming with their phones. Where is the police? The police are there, but they don't intervene. Because for the Russian police, that migrant is not a citizen, but a potential criminal or source of bribery. Indian student Dr. Mohammed Momin describes the horror he experienced in a video he shared on social media. They treat us like animals, he says. They attack our dormitories, we can't walk on the streets. Isn't that a paradox? The state needs these people to save the economy, but society is rejecting them. Why isn't the Kremlin stopping these racist attacks? The answer is very simple and terrifying. Because Putin needs that nationalist base. To avoid alienating that radical, angry crowd that supports the war, they remain silent about this lynch mob culture on the streets. An Indian worker arriving in Russia is caught between two fires, a ruthless boss at the factory and a ruthless skinhead on the street. But being beaten or working in poor conditions isn't the worst thing that can happen to them. If only it were just that. The real nightmare facing migrants in Russia begins with that Russian language paper thrust into their hands. The story is always the same. A worker is called to the office to extend their visa or collect their salary. A document written in Cyrillic, which they don't understand, is placed in front of them. This is just a standard employment contract. Sign it, get your money, they are told. He signs it. And that signature becomes his death warrant. Because what he signed was not an employment contract, it was a voluntary military service contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. A week later, he finds himself not on a construction site, but in Luhansk, eastern Ukraine, with a rusty rifle in his hands. Look into the eyes of the Indian youths in this video. They deceived us, they say. They told us we would work in the kitchen, now they are making us dig trenches. There is no training. They don't know the language. They don't even understand the commander's lie down order. For Russian commanders, they are even less valuable than Russian soldiers. They are meat. They are sent ahead to clear minefields, human shields drawing the fire of Ukrainian drones. This analysis, shared by Ukrainian official Anton Gerashchenko, reveals how Russia is using these people as pawns. Gerashchenko asks, how many of these 10,000 Indians will return alive? Answer, very few. Families in India are in revolt. In footage shared by Visegrad 24, we see Indian mothers whose children were deceived by Russia and taken to the front lines, wailing in the streets of New Delhi. Give me back my son, they cry. But Putin has no one to give back. Because those children have already been buried in the soil of Bakhmut and Avdiivka. This is state-sponsored human trafficking. Russia is acting not like a member of the UN Security Council, but like an international criminal organization. To protect its own citizens, it is throwing the poor children of other countries into the fire. So how does this scheme work? These people don't just wake up one day and say, I want to go and die in Donetsk. It all starts with those innocent-looking job postings we see on YouTube and TikTok. Human traffickers operating in Dubai, New Delhi, and Kathmandu tell these young people they will be army helpers in the Russian army. Look at the magnitude of the lie. You won't fight. You'll just cook, carry ammunition, dig trenches. The report shared by Hindustan Times, HT Tweets, includes the last voice recordings these young people sent to their families. They gave us weapons, they say. They are teaching us to shoot. They are sending us to the front lines. They came to this country as cooks, but they are being sent to their deaths as infantrymen. And here, they are confronted with the harshest reality of war, the language barrier. Imagine, Ukrainian drones are buzzing overhead. The Russian commander shouts, Vozdukh, Lojis, air attack, lie down. But you are Indian. You don't speak Russian. You don't understand what the commander is saying. And that split-second hesitation is the end of you. Reports from the field confirm that Indian and Nepalese soldiers are dying most often due to communication breakdown. As Russian soldiers retreat, foreign soldiers who don't understand the order remain in their positions and are surrounded. They are not soldiers for the Russian army. They are bait used to clear minefields, drawing enemy fire and allowing the main Russian units to move. The death of a Russian soldier is costly for the Russian Ministry of Defense. His family receives millions of rubles in compensation and a lot of car. But when an Indian dies, they write, "Missing in action." They leave the body there. And they don't pay the family a penny, because no one has read that clause written in small print in the contract. This is not just a military strategy, it is a cost-cutting policy. Putin is waging war through outsourcing. They have even outsourced death. And the darkest link in this human trade? Afghanistan. As revealed by United 24 media, Russia sat down with the Taliban to fill its labor shortage. Look at the irony of history. Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union fought in the 1980s, losing thousands of soldiers. Now it exports cheap labor to Russia. But these Afghans are even more unfortunate than the Indians, because they have no country to return to, no embassy to seek help from. When they arrive in Russia, they are completely defenseless. They are worked like slaves on construction sites. Their wages are not paid. When they protest, they are silenced with the threat, "We will send you back to the Taliban." Look at the Alabuga factory in Russia's Tatarstan region, where Shahed drones are produced. It's not just North Koreans or Indians here. There are African women, Afghan refugees. This is not a factory. It's the United Nations' most miserable concentration camp. Russia deceives these people with the rhetoric of the global South. They say, "Let's unite against Western imperialism." But at the end of the day, Moscow itself is implementing the most brutal form of imperialist exploitation. An Afghan youth flees the American occupation and seeks refuge in Russia, only to find himself dying in Ukraine for the Russian occupation. Is there any other place where fate plays such a cruel game? While all this is happening, the seams of Russian society are bursting. On one side, migrants struggling with hunger and misery, deceived. On the other, Russian youth poisoned by unemployment, war fatigue, and propaganda. The streets are a powder keg. Images shared by the Donbass DIY account show that ethnic-based gang wars have begun in Russia's major cities. Migrants are forming their own groups to protect themselves. Russian nationalists, meanwhile, are terrorizing people under the name street patrols. In a video shared by beefeater_fella, we see a group of Russians storming a market with the slogan, "Russia belongs to Russians." These images are proof that Putin's promise of stability has collapsed. The police are no longer fighting crime, they are merely watching the sides. As Russia's internal security weakens due to the quagmire in Ukraine, the streets are succumbing to the law of the jungle. In the midst of this chaos, Indian workers are the most vulnerable group. They cannot return because they have no passports, nor can they stay because they are not safe. They are in limbo, and this limbo could turn into hell at any moment. So, what does the world's largest democracy, the rising superpower India, have to say about this situation? Why is Prime Minister Modi silent while mothers are crying in New Delhi? Answer: oil and weapons. Russia has India hostage through its energy and defense industries. India buys Russian oil cheaply and grows its economy. It is dependent on Russian weapons systems. That is why the Modi government is raising feeble voices against its citizens being enslaved in Russia and sent to the front lines. The police disperse protests in front of the Russian embassy, because the strategic partnership is seen as more valuable than the lives of a few thousand poor Indian youths. But Russia is forgetting one thing. The Indian people have not forgotten. The video of that Hindu student beaten in the streets of Moscow has been viewed millions of times in India. Those coffins coming from the front lines are fueling immense anger against Russia in Indian villages. Putin may be saving today by taking workers from India, but he is losing tomorrow, namely the friendship of the Indian people, forever. By viewing the citizens of its most loyal ally as disposable material, Russia is actually shooting itself in the foot. This relationship is unsustainable. On one side are barrels of oil, on the other, coffins. The scales are about to tip under the weight of the coffins. Russia's story has always been written with great tragedies throughout history. But the page being written today is perhaps the most shameful. This country, which once sent the first man into space and was a world superpower, has now turned into a merchant who deceives and sends the world's poorest people to their deaths in order to survive. Putin may bring in workers from India to save the Russian economy. He may keep the factories running for a while longer, but he cannot cleanse this stain on his conscience. The cries of those Indian mothers will echo beyond the Kremlin walls. The fear of those students beaten in the streets of Moscow will poison Russia's future. And history will remember 2026 not as the year Russia won, but as the year it sold its soul. They show us great Russia, but we see the small, frightened, and deceived people behind that grand curtain. And what we see is not the evidence of an empire, but of a crime scene. What do you think? Can a country that loses its own citizens on the front lines survive with imported citizens? I await your comments. Stay beyond the borders in pursuit of the truth. Subscribe to MrWARLOG. I'm Charlie. Stay safe.